Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to DirectXbox number 14. Really made it 14 episodes. That's actually pretty good considering it's like every other week. That's like 27 or 28 weeks now. Anyway, we have a pretty good show tonight. What we're going to do is we'll go for an hour or so here, and then we'll move over to a Patreon specific live stream that we'll do with some of the members there. So we'll announce that as we're going live over there. But I, of course, have with me tonight Nate the Hate.
Yes, I am here tonight to talk about Xbox, as it has been a fairly busy week in terms of Xbox following GDC, and I'm also missing my beloved Yankees game right now as they're playing the Houston Astros in the second game of the season, so better make this show worthwhile if I'm going to be missing some baseball for it.
Missing the Yankees game. It's fine. There's like 160 some odd games.
And everyone counts, especially when you are in the AL East.
There's so many games in baseball, and I'm just having it on during the day and not even thinking about it. It's just there. It's like, oh yeah, another game, another one of these 160 some odd games.
That's because you're a Phillies fan.
Baseball's that it literally is the pastime where you just have it on so it passes time. And you're not like football, it's serious. You're like into every snap, and baseball, it's like if you miss an inning, you miss an inning, whatever.
That's just simply untrue.
Okay, well, hold on. How do you approach it? When you go to a game, how do you approach it when you're going to get up and get food or something?
You choose a very specific time to do so.
Which inning are you skipping? Or half inning are you skipping? Because you got to go stand in line. This whole process.
Well, it depends the flow of the game. And ideally, you don't have to use a restroom or anything. And you get the food that is being offered by the concession workers. They're walking around yelling hot dog, peanut, pistachios, beer, whatever. And you get it from them. Or you go with a group of people and you just send one of them.
You got to send somebody up to do it, huh? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, we'll see if Nate gets out to a Yankees game this year. We'll keep bugging him until he says he did.
I mean, I only have to go to Boston.
That's true. You can go to a Sox game.
Yeah, I mean, it'll cost a little bit, but I could make that happen.
Okay. We'll check in with you on that one. Well, tonight we'll be talking about that Xbox console leak that got out there again, this time with images of it, which I think is a bit different than what people were kind of expecting with it, specifically the form factor, kind of what their direction is on this one. We also have Phil Spencer having an interview that got picked out with him discussing the idea of other storefronts finding their way to Xbox, the Dragon's Dogma 2 controversy that absolutely exploded online, pretty big moves in the industry with Embracer Group selling off Gearbox, and the FTC is suing Apple. And I do wonder if this is something that could have some pretty lasting implications for Microsoft, since they do specifically cite cloud gaming in the lawsuit. So interesting stuff there. Of course, I do want to give a shout out over on patreon.com/spawncast. It does help to support the show. And we do have many members over there who are doing so at the producer level tier, which I do want to give a shout out to. First, though, of course, I do want to mention our sponsors. Been continuing on the Game Orb. You can check them out. They're linked down below in the description. Of course, they do all kinds of gaming content with different streams, exploring all kinds of conventions. So shout out to the Game Orb for continuing to support. Check them out. And as for our producers, I do want to give a shout out to Trent A, William Hogue, Mr. Joby, Joshua Butts, John O, and then once again, the Game Orb here. So shout out to everyone if you want to join up. It does help to support the different shows, DirectXbox, Spawncast, Game and Talk, and MVG's Ask a Developer. So shout out there. Let's see. Where do we want to start? Do we just want to start with the Xbox leak that happened? What have we been? I don't know what we're going to call this thing. I figured the Xbox Series X SAD, as that is technically, they call the Xbox One S all digital or Xbox One SAD. I guess we could call it that. I don't know. Do you have a name for this thing yet, Nate?
I would imagine it's just going to be the Xbox Series all digital.
Just straightforward like that, huh?
It's all digital. What else are you going to call it? That's what I don't know. I feel like you're going to call it the Series S Pro, which makes no sense because it's a Series X.
Could. I figured you would come up with something a little better. I guess I don't know. Here's the Xbox. These images are pretty funny because they're like super blown up. These would have been tiny images because you even see like the jagged lines around the different edges and stuff. And this was originally posted up by Xputer. Windows Central picked it up. The Verge did as well. All of them corroborating it, also adding additional information alongside of it. But it's mostly just like I guess there's 3 images technically, but we just have the 2 there. And it's an Xbox Series X without the disk drive and painted white. It's as simple as that. And I actually think the internals, when I got the Xbox One S all digital back when it came out and I did a teardown on it, all they did was remove the disk drive. The connectors for the disk drive were still in the system. They didn't remove it. So same board, same everything. They just pulled the disk drive. I feel like that's what's going to happen here. It is going to be a very basic revision, as in no revision, just removal.
That's basically what it looks like. And I have to say that's a very disappointing approach for them because this kind of presents that opportunity to make it look a little more unique, differentiate itself from the Xbox Series X in terms of aesthetic, and maybe create something that just has a more appealing factor, but is also different enough from the Series S. Because there's complaints on both aesthetics of the series line of hardware, so you could have done something unique here. And the fact they defaulted to just making it a Series X with a white shell and no disk drive just screams lazy to me. And I really don't understand the appeal of this particular piece of hardware. This is something you probably should have had available day one alongside the Series X at launch back in 2020, because today, why are you going to buy this piece of hardware? We know it's going to have the improved Wi-Fi. It'll likely have more storage space. But ultimately, you're now in a position of choosing between an Xbox Series S with physical media as an option or an Xbox Series X that's digital only. So you're stripping away one of the features and you're not really presenting any benefits to it. It's not as though it's smaller or unique shape. It's exactly the same thing as we currently have, just without the physical form factor.
Well, this was the leak that came out of the FTC, Xbox Brooklyn, which I think they mentioned was a plan they drew up back in basically when the Xbox Series X had released at the end of 2020. They were already drawing up these plans, and this does look like a true redesign of the system, like that midway point, that slim model that you would expect a company to come up with. But I guess they really did. Their plans did change then. This isn't seemingly what we're getting now. And it does make me wonder why their plans changed. Maybe it was we still want to come up with a revision of some kind because we have a certain strategy here, which I think the strategy is getting people completely off of physical games. I think that's the strategy. So it still needs to exist in some way. And I guess that existence is let's just paint it white and remove the disk drive and push it out there. I do wonder if this thing's going to be cheaper or just have more storage, which I don't know which direction will be best, really, because you definitely need storage if there's no disk drive, because unless you're going to keep downloading 100 gigabyte games constantly as you delete them, at least with a disk, you can take it off the shelf and it'll just install, won't use your bandwidth. I don't know. I feel like I'd rather them go to 2 terabytes and leave the price where it is, but maybe some would prefer them to drop it to 400 and keep it there.
I mean, that's where it's a very difficult thing because you more or less are envisioning that they're likely going to keep the price very similar to what the current Series X is because you are going to increase that storage space. But by removing the disk drive, you kind of just put yourself in that position of you are removing some sense of value to the consumer because you are stripping away an option. But at the end of the day, a disk drive isn't all that costly to Microsoft. So could you reasonably justify giving it a significant price reduction? Or do you maybe come out, give the Xbox Series X a price reduction to what it was selling at last holiday? I believe it was in the area of $350 at one point. So if you discount that, price this at the current price of $499 with at least 2 terabytes of space, maybe you position them that way. But it just doesn't seem as though it's really a product any consumer is begging for at this point in time. I really don't see any attraction to the product at all, but I'm also saying that as a Series X owner. there is nothing that's going to be offered from this particular piece of hardware that is going to make me double dip. And at the same time, if you are not interested in the Xbox Series X at this point, I don't see why you'd become interested in the brand once this model comes to market later this year. It's not offering anything new or unique. It's not improving performance of games or anything. It's strictly a digital system with potentially more storage space at a sticker price of what the current Series X is at. Whereas Sony did the contrast of offering a digital only system alongside their physical or retail
Mhm.
or disc, however you want to phrase it for the PlayStation 5, right there on day one. That's what Microsoft needed to do. And maybe they should have waited with the Series S and introduced that a little later in the console generation to just make that lower entry price. But right now, I don't think anyone is really hankering for an all digital Xbox Series X. So it's going to be curious how they really approach this because naturally you have to assume they will be phasing out the current Series X in favor of this all digital model. And if that's the case, where's that really going to leave them?
I think that's what's happening. I kind of feel, I mean, we heard Phil Spencer mention that disk drives are becoming harder and harder to manufacture because there's less and less companies doing it. Essentially, like getting a Blu-ray drive is not as easy now as it was maybe when the Xbox One and the PS4 first launched, say in 2013, as opposed to now. People buy computers and don't even think about it when it doesn't have a disk drive on the side. There's no DVD drive. There's no. That's fine. So we're getting into that world where it's almost weird, I guess, to make a Blu-ray drive for a system. And I mean, it seems like now consoles are really the only thing that use it like in mass. I mean, I don't really know what else other than just Blu-ray players, but how many of those still sell now compared to 10 years ago? It does
Mhm.
kind of feel like he's right. The game console is the last big thing that really uses these Blu-ray drives like that.
Yeah, and Sony has a reason to stay invested because they are one of those creators, licensees of Blu-ray, so they want that medium to exist for as long as possible and to have a consumer base. So they're going to continue to put that in their hardware as long as it's viable. But for Microsoft to really branch out and find or to serve as a client to one of these companies who is producing disk drives, it's going to become harder and harder as those manufacturers may just find that it's no longer a feasible market for them if their primary client is Microsoft. And if you can only guarantee, maybe 10 million, 15 million unit sales a year, it's not exactly all that enticing to the manufacturer to keep their lines open and get all the components and such. So Microsoft pivoting to an all digital future makes a business sense. It's just a very difficult thing to sell to the consumer base, even though there is a fairly significant percentage of gamers who are adopting digital only, but there's still going to be resistance. And right now, Microsoft is facing a significant amount of resistance as they try to pivot to an all digital platform.
I ran a poll on the channel asking specifically if you own an Xbox, how do you buy your games physically, digitally? Do you mostly stick to Game Pass, anything like that? And there was a very hard answer of like I only buy my physical games physically. 34% say that they only buy games physically. So the other 76% were like, or 60 some odd percent were like, yeah, no, it's digital's fine mostly. So I feel, and for me, that's on a channel that does mostly lean towards the idea of collecting physical copies of things, all that. So I kind of look at this thinking maybe we are getting that close to Microsoft just being at a 90% digital split. Like it might be there already. And they figure, oh, this Xbox Series X all digital, if we just pivot to that and phase the old one out, we'll push that last 5 or 6% over to where it's basically just digital now. And then we go into our 2026 release that doesn't have a disk drive, we're good. It's fine. That's kind of what I think their strategy is right now and why they're even doing this.
It could potentially be that. And, if their decision making is really driven by the idea that they can't find a manufacturer for future commitments to Blu ray drives or disk drives in general, the decision makes sense. From a business standpoint, it just becomes very hard to sell that to the consumer because how do you explain that to the consumer that we're going all digital because we can't find a company to manufacture disk drives for us at a reasonable cost?
It's probably also just in general they'll make more money as a software company, like selling these
Yeah,
things
you
all
make
the. I mean, they.
make more money. The publishers are happy. They get a bigger, get a bigger split. You remove the middleman, which would be the stores. You don't have to worry about manufacturing. You don't have to worry about shipping. So it streamlines the entire process for a lot of these companies. But you still just have that inherent risk of you're stripping away the option to the consumer. There is still, even if it is 20% of people who are buying physical copies, that 20%, when you look at a console generation or the interested individuals who be could buying hardware, that 20% could be 10, 15, 20 million people. It may not sound like a lot when you just say 20%, but if that's 20 million people that's now going to Nintendo or Sony, that's a significant piece of the pie that is now abandoning your brand and going to a competitor.
But what happens at that point when everyone's all digital? Then what? Then what? Like if Sony, because all right, so Sony went to $70. Microsoft
Mhm.
followed them to $70. They didn't just stay at 60. They were like, okay, well, yeah, we'll go to 70 also. And Nintendo charged $70 for Tears of the Kingdom. So
Mhm.
it I feel like one company sets it and then other companies eventually follow, depending. Because it really you kind of start to corner the market, and then it's like, okay, well, we're all just selling games digitally, so that advantage or potentially the viewpoint from the consumer on
Mm.
who's physical, who's digital is just out the window. We kind of reset then. Like eventually we'll probably go up to $80 games. Who's going to do that first and then who's going to follow? Really, it to me is how it'll end up being. But
See, the pricing is going to become more complicated because let's say Sony goes to $80 games with the PlayStation 6, but they retain physical media. Now, if Microsoft were
mm,
to say we're going to $80 games as well, people are going to say, why? You don't have a disc. You're not selling us anything in a physical format. So, how can you justify the price of your game increase if you're not giving us anything physically to have ownership of? Because if you're only going to give us digital ownership, which we have seen on other platforms, you can just lose the access to your license, as we recently saw with the Funimation stuff. How can you possibly justify to the consumer a higher price? It becomes very
that's a good
complicated. It
point.
becomes a tougher sell.
Here's my question though, as one of our other topics is about the handheld market that apparently everyone's getting into again. There's word that Microsoft is doing it. Phil Spencer had an interview along with the Steam and Epic Game stuff that we'll get to. He seems very interested in a handheld. Like he seems to want to have one for Xbox. So based on that, and then Jez Corden coming back saying, yeah, it looks like even more prototypes are coming out here internally at Microsoft. I think they're showing up. I think that's going to be one of their next gen launches, but Sony apparently also doing a handheld. I don't know how physical media plays into that for a handheld.
From Microsoft's point of view at the current point, I'd say they're looking at it probably as a digital only platform because their main goal would be you can play your entire Xbox library on a single handheld device. So that would include Game Pass or your digital purchases. By having a physical SKU, you just convolute that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it's going to get weird if they still have or physical games next to these platforms that are going to be digital only. It's and the fact that there's so much convenience to just buy digital then I feel like that's one of the reasons that even Nintendo, who is heavy physical, did kind of start to skew a bit digital there to where some of their reports were like, oh, okay. People are buying quite a bit more digital than probably ever before.
Mhm.
And I think it is that convenience of I don't feel like taking 10 cartridges with me on the road. I'll just buy it digitally and load it up on my SD card and call it a day. And if you lose it, it doesn't matter. You just
Mhm.
re-download it. You just re-download your games. That's it. So I feel like once you tack that on with the convenience of a handheld for Microsoft where they are now, it's just they might as well just launch that disk drive then next gen. I think the Series X is the stepping stone to get there. But Sony might be affected by that handheld too then.
Potentially. I mean, Sony could, it really depends on how they approach their handheld or their portable, whether or not they just make it essentially a portable PlayStation 5, PlayStation 6 that you're going to be sharing the exact
Hmm.
same library of games, or if they're going to do a unique portable similar to the PSP or the PlayStation Vita. In the
Oh, I
case of
hope not.
Microsoft, we're anticipating that they're essentially going to make, yeah, like Microsoft, you're going to probably just make a portable Xbox Series S. So
Like a ROG
all of the
Ally.
games will be compatible, more or less. So
Yeah.
that makes sense to have. Here's Game Pass. Everything you want to play will run on this platform. And they have to ensure that, otherwise, it's just going to be a disaster. So everything plays. There's Game Pass, your digital games. You can play them wherever you want, download them. That's convenient. And that's where that physical aspect just doesn't seem to have any sense, and it can't really fit that agenda unless Microsoft goes back to a patent that they had previously published, where they essentially had it that if you had a physical disc in your Xbox Series X, that you would get a digital license on a Series S to play the game. Now, the only way that would be really functional is they would have to have likely every 7 days a re-verification check where you'd have to insert the disc to the Series X to verify that you still own the game. And if you could do
Right.
that with a handheld of, hey, I can still play my physical Series X games on the handheld, that would be kind of a very enticing matter because it allows you that flexibility of buying your games physically and still being able to play them on a digital platform. Now, whether or not Microsoft could really put that patent into true use remains to be seen, but otherwise it would have to be a digital only handheld device, which would somewhat limit its overall appeal in certain markets, especially maybe Japan, because you've seen the success of the Switch, and you're not going to be able to replicate that if it is a digital only platform. And we've seen digital only, handhelds before. Sony came out with the PlayStation, the PSP Go.
Hmm.
Very niche, did its thing. It was also very early portable PC market, which is, as we all know, digital only. And those are still very niche products. So if Microsoft can make a consumer product that has potential, they have to address how they're going to deliver games. And it does seem as though it has to be digital only.
Yeah, that I think the writing's on the wall at this point, and I'm trying to prepare people for when that happens and they present their next gen device and there's just no disk drive there. The fact that they didn't even push their disks up to 100 gigabytes like Sony did, that really should have been the telling factor, because we see a game like Baldur's Gate 3 potentially shipping on what, 4 Blu-rays for Xbox. It's it's something to see that. So I don't think we're too far off. I'm curious how they present this Xbox. I assume it's going to be at their I figure is at their showcase in June, and then it's like, oh, it ships in a week or two, or right now you can order it online and it'll start shipping out, because these again look just like the regular Series X with that disk drive. It's not like the components are getting shifted around drastically, or manufacturing changes all over the place. I think it's something they'll probably have ready to roll, and I'm curious how they sell people on this thing, whether it's by price or by storage, because I think those are the only two things that are really going to be big factors here. But I will say, Nate, the thing that I am interested in is the fact that they are doing this revision. While it's not exactly to plan for how Brooklyn turned out, I do still think that new controller's coming. The Sebel controller. It might not be exactly like we're seeing it here in some of these images, but I think it is going to revamp the Xbox controller somewhat. So that I'm excited about seeing. And apparently that might actually get announced in May from what I've been seeing. And it maybe through maybe that's just a press release thing. Maybe they just drop it online. I don't know.
That could be an Xbox Wire thing. I mean, we've seen them announce tons of various Xbox controller colors and such through
Yeah, it's all
Xbox
the
Wire
time.
and Twitter. So adding something like haptics and such, I don't think you need to do anything significant with that in terms of an announcement. But ideally, they do innovate the controller a little bit with such features because, we have games like Hi-Fi Rush get haptic support on PC, and I don't know if it has it on the PlayStation 5. I haven't played it on PlayStation 5 yet, but I don't recall seeing any mention of it taking advantage of the haptics in that
Well,
controller.
apparently it
So
it does, and then it also takes advantage of it on PC. To my understanding, I played it on the Xbox. That's how I went through Hi-Fi Rush. But apparently, that was one of the big differentiating factors based on some of the reviews, was the haptic feedback that they got from the PS5 controller. So you're right, a new controller from Microsoft using haptics would help, and also the direct to cloud connection, where you don't need a system to connect to then go to the cloud. It's like a Stadia controller where it connects to your own router and gyro. So I would buy that. I
yeah,
am interested in that kind of controller.
I'd buy it if I see these features being utilized.
Okay, that too. That too. I mean, I feel like they'd be able to have that just set up in the OS, and it might not be exactly like you see other games where it's specifically designed around that title, but I could see them translating some of the more basic Rumble over to that, so it at least is a better experience. But I would like to assume that if this controller is coming out here in a couple of months, that games like Indiana Jones would ship with just compatibility and take advantage of it this year. So that's something I would like to see, is that controller come to fruition. The Xbox Series X all digital, the only reason I'd be picking it up is to check it out, tear down, that kind of thing, just see what they change. Apparently the heatsink's going to change. I think it's going to change in the way of, we're going to make this cheaper by removing copper. I think that's what they're going to do for the heatsink. So that's my assumption. Maybe make it a little taller and just a bunch of aluminum or something to fill out where that disk drive would go. But they'll probably change the fabrication as well. So
I think
we'll see how that turns out.
I think the original roadmap leak had suggested that the process node would shrink and a few other minor alterations, but ultimately nothing that is so significant to the consumer that would make you rush out and get rid of your current Series X to upgrade. It's really, it's weird. It's really just an odd release to me. I just don't see the appeal of it for anybody in the market for an Xbox.
It very much does remind me of that Xbox One S all digital release that didn't make a lot of sense either. So I don't know. This is strange. This is almost like it got kind of left out there, and they're like, whatever, just release it. We're going next gen 2026 anyway. Who cares? Just put it out there. It was already in the pipeline. So, I mean, they said plans change, and it really does look like plans change. So we'll see. Is this the piece of hardware you think Sarah Bond was talking about releasing? Exciting hardware.
I hope not. I'm hoping what she was mentioning was going to be related to the handheld, because if they think this is exciting, they have no finger on the pulse of the gaming industry at the moment, because nobody's going to get excited for this piece of hardware.
Yeah, unless it comes in and they're like, it's $350 now, and the Series S is now $250, like $200. It's like, oh wow, okay, now prices are way low, but they can't get the prices down apparently. So this can't be the exciting hardware release. You're right. I feel like it's something different. The controller, maybe, I don't know. Is that exciting? No, over the top? Like, we're gonna mention this in the podcast. This is gonna do it. No, I don't think so either.
It has to be something along the lines of like a handheld.
You know what?
Because that would be exciting.
Maybe they do have a handheld ready to go, and it's like, we're going to do this handheld. It's one that's more or less a test the market device, and it's going to kind of slot in with some OS updates we're going to do for other handhelds like the ROG Ally, and just see how things go. And then we're going to go all out with next gen and release a 2 SKU setup.
Yeah, I mean, they have to test things a little bit, gauge a little bit of the reaction by the gaming fan base, and the idea of just being able to play, let's say, Indiana Jones on a handheld that is just going to play the game. You don't have to tinker with the settings. You don't have to go through any of that hassle like you do with a ROG Ally or a Steam Deck. You can just play the game just as you would on a normal console. That's appealing, and that would be something, depending on the price, I would likely be there day one. Now, if it's like $600, I'd say, no thanks.
I think they have to get it to Steam Deck level. I think it has to be $400.
$400 LCD screen?
Yeah, LCD. It wouldn't be like an OLED. It'd probably just be an LCD screen, have an SD card slot, but coming in at $400, maybe with some kind of 256 gigabytes of storage. I mean, the Steam Deck is technically older at this time. I mean, I say older, but a couple years old is old in tech, I guess. But if they can make it work with their relationship with AMD and get a whole bunch of them manufactured alongside their Xbox, and 400, I think, would do it for them as a test product, just to see because if that really worked out for them, next gen they can go to 500 or something with it. So that's kind of where I'm thinking with it, and I hope that's the plan. That'd be really cool to see that for this holiday.
Yeah, I mean, a nice handheld with what's Xbox Series S level performance, 1080p screen, maybe 720p screen, 120 frames. I mean, it'd be a very enticing piece of hardware for, I think, a lot of people. And it would definitely increase their attractiveness in Japan because now you can play all those Atlas games. You can play Persona, Persona 3, 4, 5, eventually 6, the Yakuza games, all on a handheld. And some of these games aren't available on the Switch. So now you're carving out a nice little market for yourself in that region. So it's a good direction for Microsoft to take. And ideally, that is the exciting hardware that Sarah Bond was referring to. Because if it's just an all digital Xbox Series X, good luck with that.
Can you imagine trying to sell that thing on stage? Oh man. Fortunately, I don't have to do that as much now without E3. So, boy. Because I remember when they did the other revisions, like the 360E, they presented that with the Xbox One and they showed it and moved on so fast because it was like, we're whatever, who cares kind of thing. But don't show up with just the Series X all digital. Oh, that'd be so bad. I feel like they won't. I think there is something there, Nate. I think you're right. I do want to bring up something Phil Spencer mentioned in this Polygon interview, Nate, because I think there are some implications here that I think are very intriguing. So he was talking with Polygon, and the idea of the Xbox being opened up, because there's a lot of stuff going on right now with Apple being sued by DOJ and stuff. I saw people in the chat already talking about this. A lot of the focus is on their walled garden approach. Well, obviously, if Phil Spencer's bringing that up, the question around the Xbox walled garden approach comes up. And he said, consider our history as the Windows company. Nobody would blink twice if I said, hey, when you're using a PC, you get to decide the type of experience you have by picking where to buy games. That's the real value in that. Spencer believes console players would benefit from that freedom too, and so would console makers like Microsoft. This was in response to discussions around Epic Game Store, itch.io, and other digital storefronts alongside of Microsoft Store showing up on the Xbox, which obviously people then go, oh, does that mean Steam could show up on the Xbox? I mean, maybe. The way that Phil was talking, who knows? Anything could show up on there.
I mean, it seems as though they're just open to negotiation with those types of things, be it the Epic Game Store, Steam, anything like that. And if there is a will, there's a way. So it's likely that they're just having these conversations to see, can we make this happen? Is it beneficial to both parties? And it would be very interesting to see something like that happen. Because now, if you're Microsoft or even Valve, you're just broadening your reach to an audience that maybe isn't aware of you on your native platform. Like I personally don't use Steam. But now maybe if we're on Xbox, I'd look at some of those Steam deals of select games that may not be available on the Xbox platform. Or if you just want to make it that open source platform and have anything come to it. It's an interesting approach, and it's likely going to be a while before we see anything come of it, if anything is to come of it. But I think it's a good idea for these companies to always have that open line of communication to just future possibilities. That's what the gaming industry needs. It needs to grow, it needs to adapt. And that seems to be what Microsoft is doing. They're willing to just have the conversation to see if they have to adapt or evolve in certain ways. And if this is one of those paths or avenues that is viable for them, they are willing to sit down, talk it out, and see how this is beneficial for all parties involved.
You know what's really interesting about this, Nate? Well, one, I have no idea how they decide what games work on Xbox and what games don't, because Steam is just open, as you mentioned. It's like this massive marketplace of just games at times just being thrown like shotgun blasted onto this platform. Like there's, I think at one point there was like, I remember one day I looked and apparently like 100 some odd games released onto Steam. Something crazy. It's like, okay, you see the list of new releases and it just keeps going and going and going for the month of March or something. And I feel like, so while the Xbox, sure, it is like a PC in a box at this point with the hardware it's using, it's still a specific configuration. So I almost wonder if it would be like Steam Deck compatible, where they have games that are marked as, yes, this is tested, it'll work with Xbox, you're good to go. And then there'll be others that are like, you just try it and see what happens, kind of. But the thing that gets me about this one, Steam has PlayStation games. So how does that work exactly? If Microsoft said, "Hey Steam, you can be on Xbox. Go ahead. You can be on there tomorrow." That does that mean that these PlayStation games would work on your Xbox?
That would be one of those situations where it would probably come down to some sort of curated list, or they would just have to have those conversations with Sony. It would really be dependent on what exactly do you get if Steam is on the Xbox? Would you have all those games? Because if you did have those Sony games, and all of a sudden people are buying Helldivers on Steam and playing it via their Xbox, which I guess in that case the Xbox is just serving as a PC.
Yeah.
But it'd be an interesting scenario because you could just see how it would ignite the embers of a console fan war saying, I'm playing Helldivers on my Xbox, even though it's not actually on my Xbox. The Xbox is just servicing as a PC in this case. But if you're Sony at the end of the day, do you care? You got another sale.
Well, let's get a little further than that even. Epic Game Store. This is one that I feel like would be I think extremely open to go into Xbox with how they talk about Apple and open platforms. And I mean, they were going head to head with Apple in the courtroom at one point over this. Games like Final Fantasy VII are on there, remake. And these are games that have not gone to Xbox. And all of a sudden, this app shows up on your dashboard. You can buy it and it installs and plays. It's interesting. There's some games that, like Sony, while they sign these deals, they wouldn't have necessarily the control of keeping it off of Xbox then.
Yeah, that's where I guess they would view it as it's still not on Xbox. It's on Epic Game Store. Or it's on Steam. So we're not technically releasing an Xbox version. We're releasing a PC version. And by proxy, the Xbox is simply a PC. So I guess they wouldn't view it as us or them servicing the Xbox fan base. But they are taking money from the Xbox fan base. And it would be an interesting thing if this ever came to fruition, because it would almost benefit someone like me. I don't have a gaming PC. So if I want to play Helldivers on PC for whatever reason, instead of buying it for my PlayStation 5, I could do so now via my Xbox. But there is likely, a reasonable percentage of people who don't have a gaming PC and aren't a multi-platform owner. They don't own a PlayStation 5. They simply own an Xbox. And now you're giving them that option to play these games. So if you're Sony, you're making money. If you're Valve, you have a new user to your service. And if you're Microsoft, I guess your system's being used and you're getting some cut of the sales.
Well, apparently from what I've seen, and there's a lot of people who have mentioned this just over time, that Microsoft is like, and they talk about it in their own investor stuff. Their big thing is monthly active users. They talk about that constantly. Satya Nadella is always like MAUs all the time, every time. So in their mind, if the Xbox is as open as possible, and they can just get people there, whether it's that Windows, on a gaming PC, on a handheld, on your phone. Who cares if it's open and it's appealing to people and they pick up a device and use it? For them, I guess that's a win because they assume MAUs will eventually convert into revenue for them.
Yeah, ideally, I guess that would be the ideal thing, is that by having Steam or Xbox or Epic Game Store on your Xbox, that you'd be getting, let's say, a 20-30% cut of anything bought on those services if done so through your Xbox. It'd be some percentage, probably not that high, but that would be the interest for Microsoft. But it would also come down to, do you have to use your Xbox account to access these stores? Do I then have to have a Steam account? Do I need the Epic Game Store account as well? How many accounts do I have to log into to really make use of this? At some point, could it be convoluted, or is it going to be a simplified process? And that's where, if any of this is to happen, we're probably not even at a point of infancy stage. It's probably so preliminary that it's just exploratory conversations. But it would be an interesting thing to see the gaming industry really embrace the idea of, we don't need to worry about, exclusivity anymore. We have open boxes. We can put things anywhere if there's a benefit for us, and we have to branch out. We're going to be more open and essentially go that PC model.
Gaming is going to look so weird in like 10 years. It'll be very
Mm-hmm.
different. Very, very different. Speaking of different, we do have Embracer Group actually looking quite a bit different after this week because they were able to sell off, or as they mentioned, finish their divesting process with Gearbox going to Take-Two for the amount of $460 million. Now, it wasn't so long ago that Embracer Group essentially acquired Gearbox for north of $1 billion, although I will say that was a mixture of like cash, debt, stock. It wasn't just outright, here's $1.2 billion, whatever the actual figure was, and we're going to take Gearbox. So while they did buy high and technically sell low, they still had some workarounds, loopholes, and I'm sure tax write-offs and things they can do for the numbers to make a bit more sense. But either way, Gearbox going to Take-Two is very significant considering Take-Two gains the rights to Borderlands, Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, Homeworld, Risk of Rain, Brothers in Arms, and Duke Nukem. All of that now with Take-Two, who I'm sure will have no problem funding and publishing the next Borderlands, as it's also been confirmed that that is in the works. And that is a massive gain, I would say, for Take-Two at that price. That's big time for them.
Potentially, at least. I mean, Borderlands has certainly lost some of its luster following Borderlands 3.
Would you revive either Duke Nukem or Brothers in Arms?
I think both of those would be very hard to revive in the current gaming environment. When you look at Brothers in Arms, are you going to go a unique angle, or are you going to try to make something that rivals that of Call of Duty?
I would try to go, if I was really going to do it, I would try to go gritty, grounded, like historical kind of approach. So I would go with like an older something happening in history, certain battles, and kind of fictionalize it a little bit, maybe with a story and some characters you introduce. But that was the interesting thing about Brothers in Arms back then, when Call of Duty wasn't as, I mean, it's still violent. It wasn't as violent. Brothers in Arms were like blowing limbs off and stuff. It was crazy then. So I wouldn't mind seeing them try that, because Call of Duty has become very what's like fast, bouncy, futuristic Twitch. So it's like all over the place now, where it looks ridiculous. It looks like a person just drank 10 bottles of Mountain Dew and they're jumping all over the place with in Call of Duty. So I wouldn't mind seeing something in that regard, because while we used to have it back in the day quite often, I kind of feel like we've lost a step with that gritty, in your face sort of historical experience with the Brothers in Arms.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting approach if they could do that. As for Duke Nukem, I don't think Gearbox has it in them to even make a good Duke Nukem game anymore.
No Duke Nukem. I mean, it took them forever to get Duke Nukem Forever out, and that wasn't even very good when it came out. Who would you have even make a Duke Nukem game? That, I mean, Take-Two.
Nobody.
Yeah.
Certain games are just products of their times, and Duke Nukem is a product of its time.
You can still use the IP, and like they could use it, for example, if they want to do some weird crossover thing, or just like call back to it in Grand Theft Auto Online as an event. They could, I guess. But,
yeah, you could do you could do a crossover type thing similar to what they did with Bulletstorm, where Duke Nukem took place as the protagonist and he had some lines read and such. So something like that I could see them do, just as a nice little Easter egg style thing. But I can't see a new mainline entry to Duke Nukem at this point. It's too antiquated.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if they can explore anything outside of just gaming. If they can do something in entertainment, whether, I don't know if they'll do a Duke Nukem show or something. But I was just trying to figure out what they could even do with the IP now that they own it. But obviously the big get there for them is Borderlands. Borderlands 4, I guess, is now in development. Who knows when we'll see that one? Borderlands 3 isn't that old, I guess, technically. So probably years off, but I mean, that massive shift. Embracer Group, by the way, seems to be steady now after, I mean, they unloaded Saber and they unloaded Gearbox, which is like 5,000 to 6,000 employees or something now that they moved off of. And they've also canceled 20 or 30 games or something that were in development. But I feel like now, according to what they've said, that they're good now. They're not going to go out and buy anything, but they're good. They're steady. So we'll see if they can right the ship. And all of this apparently happened after their deal fell through. This is how close they've been operating to the edge this whole time. One deal falls through. While it was $2 billion, still one deal, and it just about crumbles like their company.
Yeah, I mean, Embracer is going to be an interesting thing to look back on. The damage they did to the industry and...
Oh, well, yeah, the damage they did. Yeah. They didn't help the industry. I'll say that. They helped Take-Two. Take-Two's probably feeling pretty good right now. But I do wonder if you think they hold on to Crystal Dynamics?
I think they'll hold on to them until Tomb Raider is released. I still think Microsoft makes a play at them.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking, because the initiative sort of feels like it's changed a little bit too, from being a small studio that was going to basically contract and help get support from studios like Crystal Dynamics. I think they've changed their methodology a bit, and I feel like they're just going to turn into a big studio. And most likely, like you said, Tomb Raider comes out with Crystal Dynamics, which that's like in partnership with Amazon, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, that comes out. Crystal Dynamics is freed up. And I think you're right. I think Microsoft buys basically Crystal Dynamics and merges it in with the initiative. That's kind of it.
Yeah, that's how I see things going there. Let them finish up that primary project, and then Microsoft will come in and say, okay, we want them on Perfect Dark. What do you want for them? Embracer, still hemorrhaging money, is going to say we bought them for, what was in the area of $250 million with some of the IPs. Now, depending whether or not they give Microsoft access to any of those IPs will obviously influence the price. But then Microsoft comes in with a very minimal purchase or an acquisition of them. Won't need any investigation because the price is so low, and they just go off. I mean, maybe Embracer retains Tomb Raider and such, but at the end of the day, if you're really just acquiring them to staff up something like the initiative, you don't care about any IP transfer.
Especially if Perfect Dark, well, really, we'll see what Tomb Raider turns out to be, but if Tomb Raider comes out and it's good, and they see that Perfect Dark is coming together nicely, I feel like you got to lock that in then, because it's Crystal Dynamics, I think, is a very talented studio when they're working on the right stuff and they have the right leadership and backing. And I would be slightly concerned leaving Crystal Dynamics with Embracer Group, I'll be honest. little bit. So I feel like them going to become part of the initiative might be the best course of action for Crystal Dynamics in general. And who knows, maybe the future of things like Perfect Dark come out, be really good. People are really excited, it sell well, and maybe that just becomes a series, a core franchise for Microsoft. So I would like to see that, but we need to see Tomb Raider, and I feel like I figure we would be seeing it this year. So, but it's already almost April.
Yeah, I think we see it this year. I wouldn't be too surprised if maybe we see it something at like Summer Games Fest.
Oh, that's a good point. Okay, yeah, Summer Game Fest would make sense. Yeah. So, I mean, I'd love to see it even come out for this holiday. I think it'd be awesome if it came out this holiday, but otherwise, 2025 seems it's now kind of stacking up releases already. So, industry's kind of reloading for that year. But if they can get it out holiday 2024, I think that'd be good for them. So, especially if they could launch it next to like the PS5 Pro or something as well, just because that'll probably help to sell quite a few copies extra. So, and here's another good one, Nate. We've talked about this multiple times already. I just wanted to follow up on it because it was mentioned. This is actually at PAX East, which you did not go to. You go almost every year, and you didn't go this year, Nate. Could have used you there, boots on the ground.
There was minimal reason to go.
Well, Yoshi P was there. They had a panel for PAX East and Final Fantasy. They talked about 14. They talked about 16 with Rising Tides, which looks good. But after discussion of the PC version, apparently that's getting a demo, and it sounds like it's coming together for this year, the way they were discussing it. After that comes out, they mentioned other platforms it could be going to. Now, There's not many other platforms technically that you would refer to after PC and PlayStation that wouldn't at least have Xbox in the conversation. There have been rumors around 16 going to Xbox all over the place. It sounds like they're saying it's going. There's a very good chance that it's going to Xbox, or at least they're going to work on it going to Xbox after their PC release is in.
Yeah, right now my expectation is that it lands on Xbox probably roughly a year from now. I think it may come out 1 year after the Rising Tide DLC hits. So once Final Fantasy 16 is completed on PlayStation, 1 year later it'll come to Xbox. But I wouldn't be surprised if it gets announced for Xbox some point this year. Maybe the June showcase, maybe Tokyo Game Show. But I'd say within the next 12 months, Final Fantasy 16 will end up landing on the Xbox.
This is a product of that really awkward 3-person handshake they did on stage.
I think this would probably be something that they had already worked out prior to that. I would imagine anything that they've worked out since that awkward situation is probably maybe some of the smaller releases, maybe some of the bigger things like a Final Fantasy 17, which we discussed in the previous episode. But I mean, at this point, we've seen the sales of 16. You can't imagine, Square Enix is overjoyed with what they had there. And even Sony has to be looking at them saying, we paid for this. And it didn't really do anything that significant to drive our hardware, and the software sales of the game certainly aren't what we anticipated them to be. So, let the game go multi-platform. Let it sell a few more million copies across PC and Xbox. If you get it on Game Pass, I may revisit it. I'm not sure. I already 100%ed it on the PlayStation 5, and I'm just waiting for Rising Tide DLC to come out in a few more weeks. I don't know if I would necessarily play it to completion on the Xbox. If it were on Game Pass, I would at least give it a download, revisit it a little bit just to see how it runs, see if there was any refinements and such. But I definitely wouldn't be there buying it full price if it came to Xbox in a year. But that's just me. I already played.
That wouldn't shock me though, Nate, if Microsoft was able to secure a Game Pass deal for that one, just because it's been out already on other platforms, it's sold millions of copies. Square might just be like, "Oh, let's try to get one more bag for this, and we'll put it on the store, and whatever else we get after that's great." So that is an interesting idea if that ends up happening, because that'd be big for just Final Fantasy 16 in general. But even Microsoft to show that they're starting to figure some stuff out there with Square. And obviously Final Fantasy 17, it's in the distance, but it's coming.
Yeah. They're putting in the effort to make reasonable change with those type of companies, Square Enix and Atlas and Sega and Bandai Namco and such. And having good, strong Japanese support on the platform. There's still a lot of work to be done, but they are putting in the efforts to try to make the Xbox ecosystem appealing to that type of gamer. So it's good to see the effort being made. Hopefully they can continue to improve and get more and more of those style of games as day and date. But if Sony's there with their checkbook, they're certainly going to be very competitive. But at some point, these companies are going to look at the market and say, Final Fantasy 16, the sales weren't strong. We still don't have a PR for the sales of Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth. So you kind of have to wonder, how exactly is that game performing? We only see the sales in Japan, and they're not all that great. So at some point, is Square going to look at the performance of their own game saying, unless you're writing us a bigger check to keep a game timed exclusive, we have to go multi-platform as well. And as we're seeing with Atlas, when you're bringing a title like Persona 6 multi-platform, potentially day one, other Japanese companies are going to take note of that and say, we're going to have to do the same because we need those sales, and we can't just take that check from a single company to tie up a game on a single platform for 12 or 18 months. We want to be on as many devices as possible as soon as we can.
Yeah, I think 17 will be the next one we'll really see and find out if that's a change Square made, because I feel like the remake trilogy, it's pretty clear at this time that Sony and Square locked that up for like the whole trilogy. At least it feels like right now, since remake's still not on Xbox. So I'm looking towards 17 for that. But I would hope that Square looks around and goes, okay, this thing should be multi-plat. It should be on Nintendo's platform, Sony, Microsoft, PC. I mean, who knows? At that time, the new iPhone might be able to run it. Put it there too. Like, just get it everywhere you can, because right now Final Fantasy it just needs to cast a wider net with how it currently is, especially I think with the younger generation.
I mean, that's
So
really the big thing is that when you look at Final Fantasy, it's really stagnated. Where when you look at the Persona series is growing. It's reaching a much bigger user base, and that install base continues to get larger and larger each generation, while Final Fantasy is kind of in decline. And a lot of that is, the franchise just doesn't seem to have a core vision anymore, or they're just making very odd decisions where you have titles going to Epic Game Store for 3 months exclusive periods, and then it's going to Steam, and then it's timed exclusive on PlayStation, and then it goes to Xbox. There's just too many moving parts instead of just having a single cohesive vision of we're full on multi-plat. It's on every device possible. Maybe you get a late port here and there mixed in, but you have to have just that idea of this is where the game's going to be. Because when you look at something, we'll go back to Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1, timed exclusive for over a year on PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5. Then it went to Epic Game Store. Then a year later, it went to Steam. That's a lot of waiting if you're if you're a PC player and you primarily use Steam. You know the game's coming and you're just going to sit there and you're going to wait for 2 years. And that's just bad news if you're Square Enix, who's trying to get sales out of the game. Because if you have people willing to wait 2.5, 3 years for the game, what are you doing? Just get it there day one then. Forget the check and just get it on as many platforms and get the sales.
You feel like you have the confidence in your IP, you go for it. Like as we've talked about with Atlas and Persona, the confidence is certainly there with Persona now, so they're ready to, I think, break through that wall. Let's move over. I do want to talk about the Apple stuff as well as the Dragon's Dogma 2, but at this time we had some news break that Apple is actually being sued by the DOJ. Thanks to people in the chat that corrected me. It's actually the Department of Justice doing this. This is on 16 state and district attorneys general with complaints, and they mention that it an anti-competitive behavior by restricting how third-party products can interact with its products, including apps, non-Apple smartwatches, and more. Now, they do bring up the whole messaging thing. It's like green bubbles versus blue bubbles. We'll come back to. But the one that I noticed is there is a bit of a focus in on the walled garden approach as Apple having a significant amount of control over what's in and out basically of their platform. And what is there, they have control over how, for example, money exchanges hands, as this is a whole thing with Epic, where they wanted to allow you to sideload Fortnite so that they could get around Apple's 30% cut for the microtransactions. Apple did not want that. They went to court over it, and Epic kind of ended up on the losing end of it, although people will argue either way. But essentially, the idea of the walled garden coming down means that, yes, you can have other storefronts on the iPhone. It won't just be locked to the App Store. Same with cloud gaming, because the big hang-up right now, apparently, is that Apple wants to have control over every game that goes through streaming so that they can, of course, take a cut of microtransactions, which means you can't necessarily have just a hub for Game Pass that would be the primary app. Each game would have to be rated and approved by Apple first. That's a bit of an issue for Microsoft and their strategy right now. So with this lawsuit happening right now, if, for example, Apple ends up, say, losing, then Microsoft may be able to come in with their own storefront, which, based on their recent purchase of Activision Blizzard King, seems like something they really want to do. Game streaming, Xbox storefront on mobile, that would kind of have all the pieces fall into place for them. Also, the green bubbles and the blue bubbles. Nate, are you familiar with this?
No, I am not.
Nate, you have a Galaxy S5. Let the people know.
That's
You're a bit
right.
behind
I
the
have
times.
An Android. I do not.
With what the kids have right now with the green and the blue bubbles on iPhone. So if
I have
you have
no
ever
investment in the Apple ecosystem at all.
If you've ever texted anybody who has an iPhone, like group chat, and you show up, you're the one probably ruining the conversation. Now,
Good.
I will admit, I don't know if you're a green or blue bubble then. I'm not sure which one designates Apple. Someone in the chat can tell me. I do not have an iPhone. I've actually never owned an iPhone personally. I've thought about it because I am curious of that ecosystem, but I've never actually had been Android all the way. But I have thought I've considered it. I do have a MacBook Pro that I use, and it's a very nice device. It is. The M1 chip is awesome, and I see bits and pieces of it there. Obviously, I like their like their AirPods are nice, but I have not been invested to the point where I am linked up between phone, watch, computer, TV. But okay, blue bubble is Apple, green is Android. Okay, so Nate, you are ruining the conversation as the green bubble. Okay, if anyone you know has an iPhone and you message them with a green bubble, you might as well throw your phone in the trash. Okay, so something that was really funny, Nate, get this, in the lawsuit and some of the complaints, there was discussion around teenage peer pressure for being the green bubble.
It sounds like it's a learning experience where kids can say, I am comfortable with being myself. I will be a green bubble. The hell with your conformity, and I will be different.
That does not happen in high school. Give me a break. Are you serious? No, Nate, you know, when we went to school, it was like, do you got the real Adidas or do you got the Adidas shoes with 4 stripes or 5 stripes or whatever? Come on, Nate.
Yeah, it was 20 years ago. Things have changed.
Oh man, it was 20 years ago. Jeez.
Yes, we've been out of high school for quite some time now.
Hey, it was different. That it was the clothing brand. It was the shoes. It was is it real or not? Like the clothes, is it like that? That was the peer pressure then. It wasn't necessarily the green bubble, blue bubble debate. Okay.
Hey, Android is superior. We have features long before Apple gets them. Apple just makes them a big deal, and everyone's like, wow, did you know you could do this on your phone? We're like, yeah, we did it 10 years ago. Maybe you should get an Android. But no, people like to walk around with their status symbol Apple product, like a Starbucks cup, despite it not being a superior product, because they are sheep in the capitalistic game of propaganda to walk around with a status symbol.
Maybe they just like the... Maybe they just like the OS.
My phone is 10 years old and still works. Can your Apple phone say the same thing?
I don't have an iPhone. I have like a OnePlus. What is this? OnePlus 9. It's a OnePlus. They're nice phones.
I mean, my first Android phone was when T-Mobile had the G1.
Yeah. Yep. I had a yeah, I remember those. There was that, and then it went to like the G2. But I had the first Android phone because I came off of like a flip phone, and then they had the one where it's the keyboard on the inside, and you flipped it open, and it was a big deal. And you thought, I think the one I had was the Droid phone, where it went Droid, and you like slid up to keyboard. That was my like first Android phone.
I think that was the same as the G1 because you slid the touchscreen up. It had the keyboard underneath.
Yep,
yeah, that's what I had. That phone was awesome. I like that phone.
No, they were good phones. The Droid, that thing was like metal. Like it had like weight to it. It was like heavy. And then of course, the phones got bigger and eventually like the Droid X, which was this massive looking phone, and then the Galaxy line came into play. But it was just it was mayhem back then with phones. Now phones are a little more boring now, I will say. They haven't been as interesting as back then when it was constant advancement happening. So I never got into iPhones though. I fixed a lot of iPhones, fixed them constantly, but
you
never
understand
sat down.
This conversation is aging us, right? We've just admitted that we predate the advent of both Android and iOS.
Oh yeah. No. I remember when it was being discussed, and they had like Google had like almost like there was like an Android beta you could get on. I think people were loading it on like Palm Pre's or something. It was really funny. But no, dude. I remember we used to play Snake on the old Nokia. Oh yeah.
Okay, the Nokia phones were the greatest phones of all time. You could never break.
Oh, they were awesome. They were great.
You could put that in a pitching machine and hit it with a baseball bat, and that thing would come back with like a little ding. Be like, wow.
That was great. Those Nokia phones were legitimate.
Actually,
right there.
I still have one. I have one somewhere. Yeah, I needed a second phone for something, and I just picked up like a burner phone, and it just happened to be a Nokia.
No, back then we had I mean, phones were coming out pretty consistently, and they tried to have phone games on even like the really old phones when they got color screens on them. And they were terrible. Oh, they were so bad. I remember I played tennis on one of them, and it played at like 3 frames a second, and it looked horrible on the thing. But we've come a long way since those days. By the way, I think what we're talking about right now is like 2004.
What we're talking about right now is
2005.
it's right around the time of the N-Gage, a little later.
This is like 20 years ago. This is like 19 or 20 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when the iPhone first came out, because one of my friends who was like rich got it right around the time it launched, and I remember just looking at it, like, okay, that's kind of cool, because it was so different from, like a Razor. Remember the Razor cell phone?
Yeah, I remember when they came out with that Razor phone, and that was a big deal in high school. It looked
coolest.
Just looked cool,
Now I'm definitely going to age myself here. The coolest phone in the early 2000s was the Motorola walkie-talkie phone with the chirp.
No, you're talking about the Nextel. The Nextel.
Yeah, that's it. The Nextel. When you
they had the
hit the button to
be like,
chirp,
where you at?
people do. And you wouldn't have to call. You wouldn't text message. You would pick up as just a walk. You're like, yo, where you at? Bar.
I was like 15, and there was like a pizza place up the road. It's still there. I think it changed names a couple times, but I worked there as like a runner where you just take the food out. Because I was like 14 or 15. I just collected tips from the waitresses or whatever. And the pizza delivery drivers, they'd hang out in the back. They'd just be sitting on the tables, and you hear it chirp occasionally. And it's like, oh, that's so cool. It's like, looking back on it now, it's just this terrible walkie-talkie chirp, and it's like, man, this pizza delivery drivers are the coolest.
Yeah, you look back at it now, it's like, why would you want that on your phone? But back then, that was one of the best. It worked so well for a good job. We were just like, yo, I got to get in touch with you really quick. And you had the little clip for like your belt or your pants. And you have the chirp go off. Yo. Yeah, it was basically an advancement of the beeper.
It was, yeah. Those are the days back then, though. Yeah, people are confused probably what that is. You call somebody's pager and it would show the phone number. They'd find a payphone. Which, yes, I went to a high school that had payphones in the lobby. Like, you'd go there to call people.
I had my high school's payphone that was in the cafeteria. I used to have that number in my cell phone, and we would call it randomly during the day to see who would answer it.
Oh, nice. You just watch it to see who was answering.
Yeah.
Those are the days. But yeah, I mean, this would be a big shift for Apple if they had to allow other storefronts on their iPhone, and I think Microsoft would immediately take advantage of that with a Xbox store. I feel like they're almost ready to go with it, and they're kind of hung up at the finish line. And I feel like Sony's probably doing the same thing. They're thinking if that wall comes down, PlayStation Store goes up on iOS. So I think a lot of companies are ready to jump on this if this goes their way, which tells me there's probably a lot of pressure on like DOJ to try to win this thing from Epic, Microsoft, Sony, basically all these big companies, really. I think maybe even Amazon. So it'll be interesting to see how this turns out. It's going to be a long process. This is going to take months probably for this to get done.
Now I'm thinking about all the old stuff that people today have no reference to. Remember when you had to pay like 5 cents a text message?
Yeah, I remember that. Well, I remember it was the text messages were a big deal back then. And I also remember you'd see those commercials of Sprint. And for some reason, I don't know why I remember this so vividly. Was it Sprint or was it? I feel like it was Sprint. And it was like $1 for the first 20 minutes for your call. And then, and then you had to pay extra like afterwards or something. But I remember the commercial was them dropping a pin for some reason on the ground. I don't know why I remember that.
Yeah, it was the Sprint map. It showed, it
was a pin that they would drop in slow motion on the table. I have no idea why I remember that from like 20-something years ago.
You'd have free talk after like 9 p.m. You'd get like the call card, so you'd have 200 talk hours or whatever for $20.
It's simpler times back then before social media. Yep, we had that good old TV Guide channel. And
that channel was the greatest channel ever. It took you 10 minutes to go from channel 1 to 80 because it would just randomly stop, and you'd be saying, okay, I need to see what's on MTV. That's channel 61. Where are we? We're on channel 12.
Yeah, that happened every time. I was like, all right, what's on channel 36? I think it was ESPN at the time. And I'd flip over to it, and it would be at channel 45. Like, it would have just passed. I'm like, oh, Greg, I'll sit here and watch this. So
there was no other way to know it was on TV.
Nope. Just sit there and wait. Yep. Yeah, I was a bit older then. Yeah, I remember when Simpsons were only on one day a week.
Yep, Simpsons were on one day a week. Dragon Ball Z was on Saturday mornings. Then it eventually went to Toonami.
Yeah, those are the good days. Good days. Well,
Dear Lord.
let's. I do want to finish up with this one, Nate. This is Dragon's Dogma 2 with the microtransactions. So, I have not played Dragon's Dogma 2 yet. Have you?
I have not.
I'm trying to figure out where to get it. I thought about PC. I feel like that's rolling the dice. I noticed that they have had a patch come out for PlayStation and Xbox specifically where you can turn on a cap now for 30, and I have to see how that turns out. I feel like Digital Foundry, maybe they'll do something with that. We'll see. Just to find out how steady it is at 30. That might be the move. I don't know. It's hard to say. At least I know it shouldn't be crashing very often there. Like PC, again, I'm still unsure if it's going to be crashing or something. With my luck, I'll get the version that does. But all the discussion, instead of around performance, which I think is the biggest issue, the performance, the DRM, that sort of thing, it's actually been about the microtransactions, which is interesting because Capcom's been doing this for a long, long time now, for a while, since Devil May Cry 4, I think, even had this, something like this. So it's been a minute. But in this case, microtransactions appeared on the store after the game went live. Reviewers apparently failed to convey this information as it was in the review guide. So I don't really know what happened there. But it appeared that there were 14 or 15 microtransactions, some of which worked into things like fast travel. Now, you still need other stuff to go along with that. It's not like you just buy a bunch of these things, you're just good to go for the rest of the game. But that the idea of reviving characters, things that basically play into the game itself as opposed to just cosmetics, and then also just the RC currency you can buy. Now, this is quite the conversation. Some people were not at all happy, completely against this. It's a problem. It's got to go. People shouldn't be buying or playing Dragon's Dogma 2. That was like the one extreme side. The other one is perfectly fine. These microtransactions don't affect anything. We should have more of them even. That was like the whole other side. So it is, I feel like it's a fairly nuanced conversation for having those two strong stances that I was seeing online. But what'd you think about the microtransactions, Nate? These things popping up all over the place and people talking about it.
I think at this point I'm pretty immune and jaded to the idea of microtransactions popping up in a game. It's probably a case where Capcom should have been a little more transparent in discussing what type of microtransactions they were going to have in the game and maybe allow the reviews to reflect the inclusion of microtransactions. But it also feels as though certain elements of it alone, as I did see the video that Stephanie Sterling had put out claiming that, Dragon's Dogma to scam due to the microtransactions, with the fast travel being one of the things cited there. And apparently the fast travel was inaccurate, which has also led to a lot of, negativity both towards the game as well as the mention in that video. So it's really kind of a messy situation altogether. And without playing the game, I don't know how aggressive the microtransaction element is.
I had Evan explain it to me
player, if it's something
quite extensively. So it's the reason I brought the fast travel thing, for example, Nate, is because one part you buy, but you still need other stuff in the game to make it all work together. So it's Evan was kind of going through it, but I do feel like it's something I'd have to fully play myself to be like, okay, how much would I have to rely on these microtransactions to actually play the game? Evan says not really at all, but go ahead.
So it's really just a thing that if you as the player want to make your experience a little more stress-free, you have this option available to you. And if you just want to play the game exactly how it is without entertaining the microtransactions, there's nothing lost to you. It's purely at the discretion of the player then.
That's the way it was described to me, yes.
Then it seems as though it's pretty standard for all microtransactions, similar to what we see Capcom do with the Resident Evil games. If you want to buy the infinite ammo microtransaction for $5, you can do so, or you can play the game and unlock it just through normal completion. It's all up to you as the player. It's essentially giving an accessibility option to the player, but with a sticker price. So I don't really see this really as an overtly negative if they're just giving players options. It's up to you as the consumer whether or not you want to buy it. Now, if this is a situation where you as the consumer see something available to you and you just impulsively buy it because it's there, I could see where maybe that is an issue where a publisher is taking advantage. But overall, just based on what you've said here, I don't think this really had to be met with such harsh critique. It feels as though it's standard at this point. Now, the inclusion of microtransactions altogether is a whole entirely different conversation. But this doesn't seem as though it's aggressive or taking away anything from the player. So maybe I need to play the game myself, see, just experience everything. But this doesn't sound really too extreme. It sounds pretty par for the course.
I think the issue we're running into right now with just microtransactions in general, there's an obvious gap between our understanding of it and the publisher or developer's understanding of the cost of a game. How do we make this happen? What are the risks involved? Profit margins, budget. Like, they never want to tell us any of that stuff. So we kind of have to just go off of almost guesswork. But with microtransactions like these, where I look at it and I go, okay, why do they even exist then if it's not that important? I understand why people would look at it then and go, okay, well, if we don't actually need it, how can we be sure that the game has not been altered in some way from its original form to make you feel like you want to go buy the microtransactions? Like Ubisoft when they had Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I feel like it's the first time we really saw that. Maybe it was Origin as well, where they sold you an experience booster for a single player game. And then you're like, okay, well, hold on. Is this the original experience rate that you're selling us that you had in testing? And you're like, that didn't feel grindy enough. Let's make it more grindy and then sell them the solution. That, I think, is one of the reasons people look at microtransactions like these and immediately recoil and go, hold on, I've seen this in the past. It has to be the same here. So maybe there is a bit of a distrust just in general from lack of information between publisher and customer and developer with the amount of money getting thrown around here. And what we've seen in the past with something like a Ubisoft, which, I think we could all look at Ubisoft and be like, okay, yeah, they definitely try to take advantage of some of these situations with microtransactions. They've delved into the NFT crypto stuff, trying to find money there. Ubisoft is very aggressive with the stuff. So it's almost like, okay, the publishers, the developers, all this, they're all very similar. So they must be similar in this aspect as well.
And that's the thing. I think that's a bigger conversation about microtransactions in general, because you could even look at Nintendo, where they locked the fusion difficulty in Metroid Dread behind an amiibo.
That's a good point. Yeah, that would count that as a microtransaction. Yeah.
So, microtransaction conversation is definitely a bigger thing altogether beyond just Dragon's Dogma 2 here. But in this specific case, it just feels as though this is par for the course. And I think the only thing Capcom could have done here is just been more transparent with how they were approaching microtransactions in the game and allowed reviewers to make comment on that in their review coverage. By essentially not allowing them to discuss that maybe was a disservice to the consumer at the end of the day, and that is why this became such a big conversation point following launch of the game. But again, haven't played the game yet, so this is really something I need to experience firsthand before I can really walk away with a solid opinion and understanding of exactly how Capcom approached it here.
Yeah, I gotta figure out where I'm getting it. Dragon's Dogma 2, whether it's console or PC. And I guess if I pick it up on PC and on Steam and I'm having issues, I can refund it within 2 hours. So maybe there, I don't know. And then it comes down to PlayStation or Xbox. I don't know. For some reason, I look at Dragon's Dogma, just kind of worth where I played the first one, as an Xbox game. I don't know why. So maybe I'll pick it up on the Xbox Series console and see how it does there. But I'm not expecting the PS5 Pro to show up and all of a sudden just start like blowing up at 60 FPS for it. But maybe it can. And the reason I say that is because there might be some mandates with that now all of a sudden. So I might be looking at that PS5 Pro a little bit differently now. But
I don't know. With Dragon's Dogma 2, it seems to be like a pretty CPU heavy game. And
right.
And based on the reports, we know the PlayStation 5 Pro isn't getting any CPU boost. So
Yep.
imagine performance
So
would still be a little rough.
yeah, we'll see how that one goes there though. But I need to play it. But I feel like the discussion around microtransactions completely outweighed the more important thing, which was the performance, the crashing, the unfortunate day one status of the game, just in general across all platforms when it came to just functioning, and the DRM being de novo, which, I mean, let's face it, that's probably one of the reasons the performance is so low. And Capcom heavily pushing back against anything when it comes to mods on PC, and them tying your character to their server. Like, you have to sync with their server when you turn the game on, apparently, from what I've seen and been told, to get your character information from it. So Capcom's practices outside of just the microtransactions are a bit more concerning right now, especially really with how they're viewing the PC platform, is what I'll say, which has generally been very open with mod support on Steam for the most part. Capcom, not on board with any of that. So that would be something I'd be a little more concerned about than some of these microtransactions that got the majority of the spotlight. Let's see. I think that is everything, Nate. I think we got all the topics I wanted to cover. For now, yeah. So we are going to be going over to the Patreon, the Spawncast Network setup for the after show, or hang out with some of the patrons there. So make sure you guys come on over, join us for a bit. We'll probably hang out there for 20 or 30 minutes, just like talking about some random stuff and, I don't know, whatever's going on in games. Whatever the good people want to talk about, we'll hang out and discuss some extra stuff. But that is DirectXbox number 14. Of course, Nate, thank you for joining. You want to say anything on the way out here to sign off?
Go Yankees.
Go Yankees. Are they winning?
They are winning 2-1 in the top of the 8th.
There you go. Okay. There. Good stuff. Good stuff. Thanks, everyone, for joining us tonight. We're back in a couple of weeks, talk about some more Xbox stuff. We'll see you guys then.